I'm continuing a conversation I began on our broadcast with Cherie Harder, president of the nonpartisan Trinity Forum. Cherie, what do you see as the most important issues in this upcoming election for religious and social conservatives?
Well, I think religious and social conservatives, like all Americans, are very concerned with what's happening economically in terms of a mounting debt and all the implications that has for our country and for our future. Recently, there have been different statements that have been released by Catholic bishops and signed by a wide variety of America's religious leaders talking about budget documents as moral documents. So I think this is really going to be the issue at the forefront of the coming election.
And a lot of conservatives are talking about the debt as a moral issue as well, that it's immoral to be carrying this kind of huge debt, and therefore we need to be making huge spending cuts.
Well, I think there's a lot of validity to that. The Bible actually has a great deal to say about debt, as well as about the transmission of one's legacy to future generations. So, part of any election is about the issues that are most important to the future of the country. And I think it's safe to argue that this is one that definitely has huge implications for our future.
And how do you see that affecting people's votes, then, especially from the religious conservative community?
Well, I think it can affect it in a variety of ways, but one of the most important things in any election, of course, is what you focus on. And the fact that a growing number of people have become increasingly concerned about the fact that we are not paying our bills, the debt is mounting, that our currency in some areas is becoming devalued, as well as people have experienced the impact of the recession that's been caused both by some unwise political, fiscal, and monetary policies, but they've also seen what has happened because of decisions that have been made more on a private level, both at Wall Street and even among ordinary citizens taking off more and more mortgages that they can't afford. People have had very much a real life experience with this and the pain that it causes. And so I think that is going to translate to what they're focusing on in elections ahead and possibly how they may be voting.
And especially for social conservatives that in the past maybe have emphasized issues like abortion, gay marriage were really at the top of the agenda. If fiscal issues maybe are at the top of the agenda this time around, what does that do to those other issues? Are they still in play?
Well, I think some of those issues will always be matters of concern because they do go to the very heart of what our country is about and what our future will look like. So I don't think social issues will ever go away. I do think there are many social conservatives and religious conservatives, and particularly people who would call themselves evangelicals, that would view social issues as far broader than just abortion and gay marriage. I think there are many more issues that factor into that. And I think people would include in that how we treat the poor, the least, last, and the lost, both domestically, but also around the world. So I don't think that social issues will ever go away in importance. At the same time, right now we are facing a crisis in many ways. We're looking at what's happening with entitlements and with spending, and it's become increasingly clear that decisions need to be made and be made soon because they're going to have long-term implications. And so I think that is focusing people's attention on economic and fiscal issues for the time being.
We've said that it's right now looks like evangelicals, religious and social conservatives aren't lining up at this point behind any one particular candidate. Give us a sense of what who is making an appeal and who may be really resonating with that community.
Well, we're very early in the process, so I'm sure there are many candidates who would love to claim that mantle as really making an appeal. I don't know that I see a clear front runner at this point among Republicans. I think there are many people who are trying hard. There are many people who have something to offer. But in terms of one candidate having sort of a target lock on the affections of social conservatives, I don't see it at this point.
Some people say Tim Pawlenty has close ties to the president of the National Association of Evangelicals. He might be someone that would appeal, but yet some people don't know him. I mean, is that a factor? What are some of the challenges he faces?
Well, not knowing a candidate will always be a factor. And Tim Pawlenty has much to recommend him. Again, there are several candidates out there who are very well-respected, very accomplished leaders and have a lot to offer. I just think it's too early at this point to really be able to bet with any any kind of certainty on who the candidate will be. I do think that you are seeing a change both in what has been characterized as the agenda of evangelicals, but also in the way that they relate and engage the political process. And that will be playing out over the next election. You know, in past elections, much of the political engagement of people who call themselves evangelical really was through the paradigm of religious right organizations. I think that's going to be less true this time around. Already you've seen some Christian right organizations that have essentially disbanded. The ones that are still in existence, I think, have declined in terms of power and importance. So I think you're going to see new ways of engaging both publicly and politically among evangelicals. And at this point, I don't know that all the attention is necessarily on one candidate. I think there's a lot of attention being paid on the big issues.
And in talking about the big organizations, we've seen with this Faith and Freedom Coalition, relatively new, started by Ralph Reed, who was a former leader of one of the old school organizations, the Christian Coalition. In some ways, he's been trying to step in, seeing the decline of some of these groups. Do you think times have changed for that paradigm, or is that a possible heir apparent to the grassroots organizing?
You know, I do think to a certain extent times have changed. One example is that you've seen a couple of different organizations that at one point were very powerful and influential organizations that did not survive the passing of their leader. Whether it was Jerry Falwell and his group, The Moral Majority, or D. James Kennedy and his Center for Christian Statesmanship, the organization, which was largely voter mobilization and voter education, passed away when the charismatic leader did. That suggests that there was something there that where institutionally it was weak, even though the leader was a very charismatic and influential leader. Recently, there have been books out talking about the importance of networks and institutions really in having great cultural influence. And I think one thing that you're seeing politically, but also among people who consider themselves evangelicals, are just changing ways of engaging with the culture and with politics, whether it's through community activism, volunteerism, but a lot of it really is community-based as opposed to just trying to pull the levers of power in Washington, D.C.
All right. Well, we'll be watching to see how all of that affects the political process. Cherie Harder, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.